Hello there. Welcome to Planet America's Weekend Edition. Coming to you from the Situation Room, I'm John Barron.
I'm Licciardello, and we have a situation.
A high-powered dinner for a price. 220 winners of a contest to meet President Trump.
The bill is passed.
Cashing in, President Trump making a fortune out of foreign crypto bros as House Republicans pass tax cuts and slash spending on entitlements.
And being Jewish after the destruction of Gaza. Our guest this week is academic and author Professor Peter Beinart. But first,
there were distinct echoes of Trump's train wreck Oval Office ambush of Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky in late February in this week's meeting with the President of South Africa. Even in his initial words of greeting to President Cyril Ramaphosa, who was there to try and talk about trade and escape American tariffs, it was clear that President Trump had something else on his mind.
He is a man who is certainly in some circles really respected, other circles a little bit less respected, like all of us, in all fairness, like all of us.
We all like that.
The people Trump says have a little bit less respect for Ramaphosa are white South African farmers, some of who have had their land confiscated from them, and around 50 have been granted refugee status in the United States.
We do have a lot of people are very concerned with regard to South Africa, and that's really the purpose of the meeting, and we'll see how that turns out. But we have many people that feel they're being persecuted, and they're coming to the United States.
But this wasn't just about some white farmers who've lost their land. Trump then went into false claims of a so-called white genocide against Afrikaner farmers. And his presentation included pictures and videos of what Trump and others have claimed are the graves of white farmers killed for their land.
Now this is very bad. These are burial sites right here. Burial sites, over 1,000 of white farmers, and those cars are lined up to pay love on a Sunday morning. Each one of those white things you see is a cross, and there's approximately 1,000 of them. They're all white farmers, the family of white farmers. And those cars aren't driving, they're stopped there to pay respects to their family member who was killed. And it's a terrible sight. I've never seen anything like it.
Ramaphosa was clearly shocked and confused by the presentation.
Those people were all killed.
Have they told you where that is, Mr. President? No, I'd like to know where that is, because this I've never seen. Okay.
I mean, it's in South Africa.
Well, yeah, it was in South Africa, but those pictures which have been spread far and wide on social media are not of actual human graves. They are symbolic wooden crosses that were part of a protest in the Northern Cape province near Hanover following the death of 2 white farmers there in 2020. It was an outrageous and embarrassing mistake by Trump and his advisors to claim otherwise, or it would be embarrassing if they had any apparent concern for facts. It is true that South Africa has got one of the highest murder rates in the world. 72 murders every day in a country of 60 million people. More than 26,000 murders last year, but of those, just 44 were linked to farming communities. Just 8 of those were of actual farmers. That is still tragic, but it is not genocide. It is, according to Reuters, a conspiracy theory supported by South African-born Elon Musk, who, by the way, was also in the Oval Office for this meeting. But Trump wasn't giving up on this falsehood. Ramaphosa tried repeatedly to explain that, yes, there are a lot of murders in South Africa, but not a lot of those being murdered are white farmers, and it is certainly not state policy to allow white farmers to be murdered so that black people can steal their land, as Trump repeatedly alleged.
There is
Nothing happens.
There is criminality in our country. People who do get killed, unfortunately through criminal activity, are not only white people. Majority of them are black people. And we have now been utilized.
The farmers are not black. I don't
now
say that's good or bad, but the farmers are not black. And the people that are being killed in large numbers, and you saw all those grave sites, and those are people that loved ones going, I guess on a Sunday morning, they told me, to pay respect to their loved ones that were killed.
Trump also repeatedly waved around alleged photographs of people in hazmat suits exhuming the graves. Turns out, Chaz, they were taken in Congo of Rwandan insurgent fighters who had been killed there some years ago. But even more embarrassing, Trump gave white members of this South African delegation, including a couple of professional golfers and businessmen, a lot more of a chance to explain, but it just wasn't getting through to Donald Trump. He believed what he believed and he wouldn't back down even though it was completely untrue.
That sounds like our Trump. Although I must say I do find this topic generally quite hard to fact check because the white farmer murder stats are really very rubbery. South Africa simply doesn't record the race of murder victims.
It's true.
But for the record, on the low side, official South African police figures are along the lines of what you were saying before. They suggest over a 4-year period, 225 people were killed on South African farms overall. 101 of them were current or former farm workers who are mostly black. 53 of them were farmers who are usually white, and presumably the other 71 people were mostly family members of the farmers who are likely white. Now that's over 4 years, so we're talking like one white farmer a month. But even the highest estimates out there, they're the ones from the Afrikaans rights groups, they suggest about one white farmer is killed every week, which is a lot, but it's roughly half the rate you would expect given South Africa's murder rate and the proportion of South Africa's population that white farmers occupy. South Africa is, as you say, just a super violent country. Look, that doesn't mean that some of these white South Africans aren't legitimate refugees, although a number of the ones in America at the moment weren't actually farmers. But Steve Miller suggests that the situation in South Africa does fit, quote, the textbook definition of why the refugee program was created, because he says this is persecution based on a protected characteristic, in this case, race. Now that is an extraordinarily hypocritical comment given Miller's dogged opposition to all other potential refugees. But if there are a few South African farmers who do fear for their safety because of racial violence, then sure, look after them. I'm not saying don't. But let's not forget the other refugees that Trump has denied, even refugees who have been vetted, approved, and had already bought plane tickets to come over when Trump took over, because there are quite a few of them.
Yeah, so even though there is some question mark over the statistics, no matter how you slice and dice those statistics, we are talking about dozens of deaths over a 4-year period. We are not talking about genocide. We can say quite definitely white genocide is a myth. It is an offshoot conspiracy theory to the white replacement theory that a bunch of Trump's fellow travellers like to promote. And the fact that Elon Musk, the world's richest man and owner of X, is still pushing this lie, and Donald Trump has been given this information by, the White House staff that put him in that position to say this is information you should confront the President of South Africa with. It is absurd, but it is also highly, highly dangerous.
Yeah, I was going to say that the number of people who call this a white genocide, who would say that what's happening in Israel and Gaza at the moment is a genocide, I think it's probably zero, but I think the numbers are a little bit larger over in Gaza than they are in South Africa.
Yeah, which again is not to say that a single murder is justified.
Absolutely.
And we understand that if you are a white South African farmer facing compulsory acquisition of land, often without compensation as well, still, white South Africans are 7% of the population and own about 70% of the land still. So there is a land reformation process. There may be violence and intimidation aimed at getting people to leave their land. All of that can be true. White genocide is a lie. It is not happening, and the President of the United States was promoting that to the face of the South African president. It was ridiculous and dangerous. Meanwhile, Donald Trump and his Republican allies on Capitol Hill this week have been pushing forward with a massive domestic policy bill, including a conservative wish list of tax cuts, border security and immigration measures, and savings on entitlement programs like Medicaid. That's health care for the poorest Americans and those with disabilities. It's all bundled together in what Donald Trump likes to call his
One big beautiful bill.
And the sprawling 1,000+ pages of legislation, which was still literally being written while it was being tabled for procedural votes this week, has even been called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Presumably for the same reason you let your 5-year-old name the dog, in the hope that they will walk and feed it. The House has passed this bill with just 2 Republican defections. 2 other Republicans failed to cast a vote in the early hours of Thursday morning. Arizona Representative David Schweikert arrived late, and New York Republican Andrew Gambarino fell asleep. But now it's up to the Senate to pass a bill that can be reconciled with this House bill. It is likely to contain deeper spending cuts to try and rein in the deficit. Unlike House members, who are all facing re-election next year, only a third of senators need to answer to voters in 2026. So, Chaz, there is still a lot of sausage making to be done.
Yeah, this is the easy part of the process so far. The Senate is where it gets tough because people like Lisa Murkowski, they're not going to accept these terms. Firstly, these tax cuts overwhelmingly are favouring the rich, with some particularly massive giveaways, like allowing people to deduct up to $40,000 worth of state taxes from their federal tax bill if they earn up to $500,000 a year, also giving huge tax breaks to hedge funds and private equity types. Meanwhile, the savings are largely targeted at the poor. $700 billion being taken out for Medicaid, $300 billion out of food stamps, subsidies for private health insurance for poor people being taken away. We're talking 10 to 13% of people losing their health insurance potentially overall.
Yeah, there's some debate, as you'd expect, around just how many people might lose their health insurance as a result of this. Some of the figures that Democrats have been pushing around, talking about, 7 or 8 million. Republicans say, well, we're not going to make changes that will, remove, we're not going to try and save money by getting people off Medicaid. But the reality is, of course, it's the states who'll make those decisions, the states that will determine who qualifies, and they're going to make it harder. And they're going to try and wind Medicaid back. So it is just for the poor and the disabled, not for the working poor, or for those who are unemployed or working on a casual basis. And because so many American healthcare plans are attached to your job, if you're a contractor, you can be going from one health insurance plan to another all the time, 3 or 4 different ones in a year. And if you get sick in between 2 of those contracts that you've got, then you're in deep, deep trouble. And that's where Medicaid has expanded since the Obamacare era to try and paper over some of those gaps. So this is going to be very interesting. At the end of the day, they want to save money. The way you save money is by having less people taking that money.
Totally. If you have a situation where, you just got to get a job and they get a job, you're not saving money, are you? You're only saving money when people get less Medicaid. And so essentially they're lifting the bar to qualify for Medicaid, so not so many people clear it. And the people who aren't going to clear it, they're going to be the people who most need it.
Right.
They're going to be the disabled, they're going to be the disadvantaged, they're going to be the confused, the people who don't speak English, all that kind of stuff.
Counter-argument, of course, is, no, those are the people who really deserve Medicaid. We're preserving it for them. We're getting the people who just don't particularly want a job and don't want to pay for their own health insurance. We want to get rid of the freeloaders. That's the argument.
Sure, we'll make the paperwork easy for them then. How about that? When you add up all those tax and spending cuts, the bill targets those earning less than $20,000 a year. And it rewards those earning more than $200,000 a year. That's according to the Urban Institute. Now, targeting the poor could maybe be justifiable if it was particularly good for the economy. But no, the spending cuts aren't about fiscal responsibility. They're just slightly financing that massive debt-enhancing tax cut. According to the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, this bill adds $3.3 trillion to the debt over 10 years. Even more if you made all those temporary tax cuts in this bill permanent. According to the Congressional Budget Office, this will push the debt past World War II levels as a percentage of GDP. That lower dot you see on the right there is the bill as written. The higher dot is if the tax cuts are made permanent. So how do Republicans respond to these CBO figures? Well, firstly, they just ignore the massive tax cuts and pretend the bill is only savings.
Quick follow-up. Is the president okay with this bill adding to the deficit?
This bill does not add to the deficit. In fact, according to the Council of Economic Advisors, this bill will save $1.6 trillion.
Whereas the most direct types just dispute the CBO. The Tea Party's Andy Barr said the CBO score's wrong. The CBO has been wrong repeatedly. Why? because what we know about this bill is jet fuel for the economy. But that's just not true. $3.5 trillion of those tax cuts are simply extending the old tax cuts and maintaining the status quo. Pretty watered down jet fuel. That is why the Tax Foundation only projects the bill will increase GDP by 0.6% over the next decade. Now, it's not like there's nothing else in this bill, John. There's heaps in there. It has $150 billion extra for defence, for instance. Some of that could be hugely useful. Probably not the $25 billion for Trump's Golden Dome, but the rest of it could be really useful. It has $70 billion for border security, including $50 billion to build the wall. That's popular these days in America, John. They like it. But there are also some serious problems in there that have been largely hidden. Like the budget tricks, they are off the charts. No taxes on tips or overtime. Yeah, we talked about that a lot. It only runs till 2028. Spending cuts often begin after the midterms, and the use of temporary tax cuts that Republicans really have no intention of actually being temporary, it's running rampant. This is the deficit impact of the bill over time as written. This is what happens if the tax levels are made permanent. A very different story, and that's not a throwaway. This is the main issue of the bill. As friend of the show Jessica Riedel noted,
if you take out the expiration dates, which even Republicans say are not real, this tax bill will cost more than the 2017 tax cuts, the Pandemic CARES Act, Biden stimulus, and the Inflation Reduction Act combined. It would add $6 trillion over 10 years to the deficit. Ultimately, my projections show deficits heading to about $4 trillion a decade from now if this bill is passed combined with the baseline, and even higher if interest rates rise, and we've seen that interest rates are rising.
But that is all as the bill stands. Like you say, John, it may look very different by the time the Senate is finished with it. Just one example, under pay-as-you-go rules, the current bill will generate an automatic $535 billion in cuts to Medicare over the next 10 years. The Senate and Trump will not be wanting that to happen, so this could change quite a lot.
Yeah, and in very simple terms, the politics of this is such that this is what Donald Trump promised he would deliver for his supporters last year. House Republicans are saying, give him everything he wants that we can possibly pass, which is what they've done. The senators, well, they're likely to pare back a bunch of things, but at the end of the day, Donald Trump will claim victory and say, here, we've done everything we said we did, mission accomplished, and people will move on and possibly not notice that a bunch of these things may not happen or may stop happening in 2028 before the next election.
Absolutely. They've got to pass something because the debt ceiling is going to be hit by August. So something will get passed.
Yeah, no doubt about that. President Trump has hosted a gala dinner, meanwhile, at his golf club in Washington, D.C. for more than 200 buyers of his self-titled cryptocurrency token. And they paid anywhere from $55,000 to almost $38 million for the privilege of being at this one dinner. For the buyers, it's a chance to lobby the president and potentially influence his thinking on cryptocurrency policy and a range of other fiscal policy issues. For Trump, it's been a way to resuscitate the value of this meme coin of his, which has no inherent value other than what people are willing to pay for it. It's a high-tech version of printing your own money. In the 2 days before Trump was sworn back in for a second term in office in January, the Trump coin soared from $16 to over $60. Within a fortnight, it had crashed back down to $15. By mid-April, it was down in the doldrums at $7. Plenty of people had done their dough. That is when Trump pulled off what is either a business masterstroke or an obscene act of political corruption, possibly both, when he announced this gala dinner for the biggest purchasers of the coin. Now, most of the people at this dinner were anonymous. Analysts say that around half of them are overseas buyers, and going into the event, there were some Chinese and South Korean multi-billionaires. But this has raised all sorts of concerns about foreign influence as yet more money pours into Donald Trump's personal coffers from shady foreign sources. Secretary of State Marco Rubio was asked about the implications of all of that and Trump's crypto bash during a Senate Foreign Relations Committee meeting this week by Democrat Chris Murphy.
president has offered access to him to the 200 top purchasers of his meme coin. Reports are that maybe about half or more of those individuals who will be meeting with him, many in a VIP reception, are foreigners. Do you have a list of those foreign individuals who will be meeting with the president?
I don't. I don't know anything about it. I didn't even know there was a dinner on Thursday night, so I'm not sure what you're referring to.
So you don't know whether any of the foreign individuals who are going to be meeting with the president this Thursday night, for instance, are on our list of sanctioned individuals, or whether any of those individuals have connections to, let's say, terrorist organizations abroad?
Well, I think if they had terrorist links, the Department of Homeland Security probably would not have allowed them into the country. But again, I don't even know there is a dinner on Thursday. You're asking me about something I don't know about.
So Marco Rubio then went on to say, oh, he's Secretary of State, not Trump's social secretary, which is a cute line. But extraordinarily, he claims to know nothing about this dinner, and he maintains that Trump isn't doing business. It's Trump's family. That is just wrong. Meanwhile, this deal over the Qatari jet has also, speaking of apparent gross corruption, they've gone ahead and they've accepted this $400 million replacement Air Force One, despite major ethical and security concerns. It's going to require extensive and expensive upgrades in order to be able to serve as Trump's planes for maybe a year or two before he heads off into post-presidential life, and it becomes the star attraction at the Trump Presidential Library and Museum.
A lot to talk about here, John. Okay, first of all, let's be clear about these meme coins. Like you said, they have literally no value whatsoever. They're not legitimate investments. Even the website where you buy them says Trump memes are not intended to be an investment opportunity, investment contract, or security of any type. So this is why many actual crypto traders hate these meme coins, because they're shady as hell and they can be scams. They make legitimate crypto traders look like crooks. I mean, CNBC had some numbers on this a few weeks back. Out of the 2 million wallets that have bought Trump's coin, 764,000 of them lost money. 58 of them made more than $10 million. Sounding a little bit dubious and exploitative to me. But if this sounds to you like we are simply scaremongering, people aren't even hiding that they're trying to buy favours with these meme coins. We're talking about foreigners anonymously donating directly to his pocket. The man hasn't divested from this at all, no matter what Marco Rubio says. There's only one reason to do this, and it's for access and favours. A trucking logistics firm, I told you about this a few weeks back, bought $20 million worth of Trump crypto coins to explicitly influence the administration's trade policy. The CEO said it would be an effective way to advocate for fair, balanced and free trade between Mexico and the US. And that's the guy who's prepared to put his name to it. Imagine the anonymous types from overseas.
Yeah, and a lot of them are not staying anonymous for long. They're letting Trump know through social media that they have just bought $10 million worth of his currency. And, oh, looky, suddenly the Securities and Exchange Commission is no longer investigating a bunch of my other dodgy business deals. What a coincidence.
You're referring there to, obliquely, to Justin Sun, who was the major buyer, the number one buyer.
He was the $38 million man at dinner.
Yeah, so it does stink. But if this all sounds kind of corrupt, don't worry. The House has oversight of this kind of thing,
Do
John.
they, though?
They do. They're right onto it. This is what House Speaker Mike Johnson had to say.
Whatever President Trump is doing is out in the open. They're not trying to conceal anything.
But, Mr. Speaker, the investment in the meme coin, those folks are not transparent. We do not know who those people are.
I don't know anything about the meme coin thing. I don't know. I can just tell you that, I mean, President Trump has had nothing to hide. He's very upfront about it, and there are people who watch all the ethics of that, but I mean, I've got to be concerned with running the House of Representatives, and that's what I do.
Congressional oversight, though? That's the congressional responsibility, isn't it?
Congress has oversight responsibility, but I think, so far as I know, the ethics are all being followed. So, yes, sir.
Hope that puts your mind at ease, John.
It's the same Sergeant Schultz playbook as Marco Rubio. I know nothing about this. Oh, I assume that all the ethics are being taken care of, but I know nothing about crypto. Crypto what? Sorry?
As for the Qatar plane, the jury's out if it's even saving the taxpayers' money a cent because I know it's $400 million a plane, but refitting it to be suitable for Air Force One is going to cost over $1 billion.
And not just refitting, they have to pull this thing apart. Because the reason why the Air Force One project at Boeing, one of them, reasons why it's taking so long, is you need to do security checks, background checks on every single person involved in every single component, because you cannot have somebody doing a little bit of sabotage so this plane maybe falls out of the sky in 10 years from now, or there's a listening device in there because this person's actually working for some foreign intelligence organisation. So they need to make sure the thing itself is incredibly secure before they start putting on, you know, anti-ground-to-air missile systems and secure communications. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, so the situation is it might take a year, it might take 2 years for them to do this. So he might only get use of it as president.
It's going straight to the museum.
For 6 months or, well, the museum.
Yeah.
Maybe the museum might lend it to Trump for a decade while the museum gets built.
Yeah.
We'll see. I mean, what might end up happening, we just don't know, but what might end up happening is you might have a situation where this isn't a bribe from Qatar like people are selling it. This is just Trump getting a taxpayer to spend $1 billion turning his new plane into something really cool.
Yeah.
That's what this might be.
And he'll want that security after he's no longer president as well. He'll love that plane. That's terrific. The United Nations warned this week that thousands of children in Gaza are facing imminent death due to lack of food and medical supplies. Over 1 million people are in danger of starvation after months without aid. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch and UN representatives have all accused Israel of inflicting genocide on the Palestinian people living in Hamas-controlled Gaza. The Israeli military operation to try and eradicate Hamas after their surprise attack on Israel on October 7th, 2023, has escalated again this week, with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu now vowing to control all of Gaza. Close to 2,000 Israelis and in excess of 50,000 Palestinians have already died in this 18-month conflict. Anti-war protests have been seen around the world, many of them on college campuses, particularly in the United States, most of those pro-Palestinian, and that has led to a lot of claims, some justified, some perhaps not, of anti-Semitism. The Trump administration has used those allegations to withhold funding from universities, banning Harvard today from having any foreign students at all, and they've been deporting pro-Palestine demonstrators they accuse of supporting Hamas. And the bloodshed came to the American capital this week, with the shooting deaths of 2 Israeli embassy workers as they left an event at a Jewish museum. Their killer shouting a pro-Palestinian slogan before they were arrested and taken into custody. Well, journalist, academic and author Peter Beinart, who was once a staunch supporter of Israel, has written a new book called Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza, in which he explores the history, the morality and the reality of the conflict and his own changing views. He's in Australia to attend the Sydney Writers' Festival, and he joined us this week in the Situation Room. Peter Beinart, welcome to the program. Good to see you.
Thank you.
In your latest book, you begin with what you describe as a note to a former friend. I wonder how many friendships within the Jewish community, how many family relationships do you think have been damaged by what we've all been watching in Gaza for the last 18 months?
Well, I can't speak about Australia, but in the United States, I think quite a lot, especially along generational lines. The polling suggests quite a dramatic generational gulf between older American Jews who remain very staunchly in support of Israel, many, and younger American Jews who I think are thinking very, very differently. And so very frequently within many families, this is a very, very painful subject. It was painful even before October 7th, and I think over the last year and a half, as Israel has systematically destroyed the Gaza Strip, I think many relationships have been pushed to the breaking point.
Why, in your view, has the issue of Israel become so much more divisive to the Jewish community today than it was in periods of controversy in the past?
That's a good question. I think partly it's because Palestinians historically really lacked what the literary critic Edward Said called permission to narrate. They weren't part of the public discourse in the United States. So their experience of Israel was often absent. But especially for younger people who see social media, I think Palestinians and their supporters have been able to bypass the mainstream media, and especially over the last year and a half, people seeing these unmediated images on social media much, much starker than what they're getting in the mainstream media in the U.S., and getting a perspective on what Israel's doing in Gaza, and not just in Gaza, that leads them to have a very different perspective about the morality of the state.
Peter, when those older folks that you talk about who are more pro-Israel in their outlook, when they hear reports from the United Nations such as this week that 14,000 babies are potentially going to die this week as a result of a lack of baby food in Gaza, how do they defend that, or do they immediately go to, well, this was done to us on this occasion and this occasion and this occasion?
I would say one of the most disturbing things that I tend to see is that people tend not to engage with this news at all. I mean, human beings have a really frightening capacity to filter out news and information, and I'm not immune from this. I mean, all of us do this, right? Which is disconcerting to them. So what you notice on the American Jewish right is that people focus intensely on the question of anti-Semitism, or what they claim is anti-Semitism. I don't think it always actually is anti-Semitism. And they focus much, much more on that than what's actually happening to Palestinians on the ground. So very frequently you find that the amount of time that they actually just spend focusing on these questions actually is really minimal compared to, I think, the amount of time they should be.
Peter, how do you view the way that anti-Semitism and the allegation of anti-Semitism has been used in the last 18 months in the United States? And clearly anti-Semitism exists. It's been inflamed by what's been happening between Israel and Hamas, but also it's been used as a way of silencing people, even deporting people from the United States.
Right. I mean, the actual academic research shows that anti-Semitism, if you take a traditional definition of anti-Semitism, right, which is just hostility to Jews as Jews, is much higher on the right than it is on the left in the United States, and it tends to travel in concert with other bigotry. So the Americans who most don't like Jews also tend not to like Muslims, immigrants, black people, LGBT. They generally just have a kind of a hierarchical view of an America that they would like, in which white, straight Christian people are on top and everybody else is on the bottom. Now, that's not to say there isn't anti-Semitism on the left. Of course, there's also anti-Semitism on the left, but actually, just as with anti-black racism or anti-LGBT racism, you tend to find it is weaker. But the reason there is so much focus on anti-Semitism on the left is because this is a way of trying to silence what is a pretty dramatic cultural and generational shift towards more support for Palestinians, as you see on college campuses. And so the way to delegitimize this is to say that it is in its core anti-Semitic, to say that anti-Zionism, which is questioning the idea of a state that privileges Jews over Palestinians, is anti-Semitic, right? But I would argue that if you believe in the idea of equality under the law, if you want a country that treats Jews and Palestinians equally, that's not bigotry. Equality is not bigotry. It's the antithesis of bigotry. But now we see that Donald Trump has taken this discourse and made it part of his effort to create an authoritarian regime by using this claim of anti-Semitism to try to take over, essentially take control of America's universities.
Leaving aside exploitation for a second, do you think the issue of anti-Semitism receives the right amount of attention in America, too much or too little?
I would say when one talks about anti-Semitism from the American right, which is the largest form of anti-Semitism, one should see it as part and parcel of authoritarian ethno-nationalism, of this effort to turn America into a white Christian ethno-state. Now, that movement involves a lot of anti-Semitism, as well as even more Islamophobia, anti-black racism, because it's essentially, again, an effort to create a kind of legal hierarchy between white Christian Americans and everybody else. If one's talking about the question of Israel and Palestine, anti-Semitism is an important question, but it should be thought about in tandem with the question of anti-Palestinian bigotry, right? Which is, if we believe, as I do, that Jews and Palestinians should be treated equally, then bigotry against either group should be equally wrong, right? But there's almost no discourse in the United States about the idea of bigotry towards Palestinians, right? And so my problem is not that, I'm a Jew. I'm often walk down the street wearing kippah. My son does too. I have a great interest in making sure that anti-Semitism is as low as possible. But the problem to me is that oftentimes that conversation swallows the other really important question, which is a question about whether Palestinians and their advocates in the United States are being treated fairly.
Peter, what was your reaction when there was reporting in the Wall Street Journal in the last week that Israeli intelligence has now concluded that October 7th was about a number of things, but principally it was about stopping the normalisation of relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and that to that extent it was a predictable reaction from Israel and it fell into their hands in a bigger picture. How does that change our understanding of the conflict and the reaction to October 7th?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can say two things. First of all, we can say that October 7th was a horrifying massacre, right, and a series of war crimes. Right? I fundamentally believe that no matter what grievance you have, no matter how profound your oppression, you don't have the right to target civilians for murder and for kidnapping, period, right? But if we want to make sure that October 7th never happen again, and we want to try to create an environment where both Israeli Jews and Palestinians are safer, you have to talk about the core realities that existed on October 6th. And I think this goes to your question, right? Palestinians in the West Bank live under military law without the right to vote and without citizenship. Palestinians in the West Bank live under a blockade that has been called an open-air prison by Human Rights Watch. And most of them are not from Gaza. Most Palestinians in Gaza are refugees who were forced from their homes in 1948. Many of them can even see the lands from which their families were forced. Gaza was considered unlivable by the United Nations on October 6th, right? And so under those circumstances, what Palestinians saw was that their fate prospects for changing their circumstances, for moving towards the idea of Palestinian statehood, were receding, right? The world was moving on. The United States, Israel was moving closer to diplomatic normalization with all of the Arab countries, including Saudi Arabia, the most important one. And I think it was under this context that Hamas decided to roll the dice and commit this terrible set of crimes, because basically they were trying to change the trajectory in some way, even though they must have known that the costs for their own people would be catastrophic, right? It seems to me if the Biden administration had pursued a different path, if it had not put the Palestinian question on the back burner, if it had not given Israel unconditional support to a government that was burying the two-state solution, maybe we would not have gotten to this point.
Peter, you've spoken about amplifying the pro-Palestinian perspective in America. Obviously, at times there can be a blurry line between amplifying the pro-Palestinian perspective and amplifying the pro-Hamas perspective, which is a different thing. How do you do that? How do you bring out the Palestinian voice without allowing pro-Hamas and pro-terrorist elements to hijack that and to distract from the pro-Palestinian voice?
Well, you know, one of the values of having many Palestinian voices is precisely because then you see that Palestinians don't all agree, right? Many Palestinians hate Hamas. Many Palestinians don't oppose Islamism very profoundly, right? There are divisions between religious and secular among Palestinians just as there are among Jewish Israelis. So part of that's the value, is that you see a variety of different Palestinian perspectives. But I also think it's important to remember that Palestinian armed resistance against Israel, including armed resistance that I consider immoral because it targets civilians, did not begin with Hamas. Hamas was only founded in 1987. In fact, when in Hamas's early days, the Israeli government was actually fairly sympathetic to them because they couldn't imagine any Palestinian group worse from their perspective than Yasser Arafat's PLO and the left-wing PFLP. The reason I think it's worth remembering this is that Israel has fun. Again, I'm not an apologist for Hamas. I think Hamas has done terrible, terrible things, including killing a friend of mine in a bus bombing in the 1990s. But Israel fundamentally doesn't have a Hamas problem. It has a Palestinian problem. If Hamas were to cease to exist tomorrow, do you really think that Palestinians would not be fighting against Israel, especially now that they've been dying by the tens of thousands, right? So unless you deal with the core grievances, some other organization is going to emerge. It may be Islamist, it may be not, that is going to basically fight against Israel because people simply will not live without basic rights, without resisting.
Peter, you're right about the role that a sense of collective victimhood plays, and obviously for profoundly significant historical reasons there is a real sensitivity to that. I wonder how that plays into when Jewish people in Israel are being accused of being the perpetrators of genocide, presiding over apartheid, things that are seen historically as evil. How they grapple with that to think about how they are living their lives and where they're living their lives.
Right. I mean, part of recognizing Jewish humanity, which anti-Semites historically have not done, is recognizing that Jewish people can have the full range of human experiences as all other people, right? Which means being the victims of terrible injustice and committing injustice. And it would be wonderful if people who had suffered terrible injustice became immunized from doing that. But we know that within families and within nations, that's not always the case, right? So in one moment in time, in many moments of time historically, Jews have suffered terribly. But it doesn't mean that the situation that Jews are in vis-a-vis Palestinians today is the same as the situation that Jews were in Tsarist Russia in the early 20th century or in Nazi Germany. The situation is actually radically different because in those cases, Jews were legally subjugated. In this case, Jews have legal supremacy, right? And they benefit from a state that has been called an apartheid state by even Israel's own human rights organizations. So it seems to me one needs to recognize that reality if one wants to to think about solutions that are going to make everybody safer. And what, unfortunately, I think one finds is the Israeli government and many diaspora Jewish organizations try to put Israel and Palestine in 2025 into this template of anti-Semitism in 20th century Europe. And what that does is it ignores the realities that Palestinians live under.
Peter, what do you think is the ultimate path forward for Israel, and has your view changed in the last decade?
I think that if Israel continues to have impunity, if it continues to be able to do virtually whatever it wants to Palestinians, it will move towards the destruction of the Palestinian people. The path that Israel is on a path of what you could call something like the American or Australian solution, by which I mean what my country did and what your country did to its native population. Not kill everybody, but essentially destroy the population to such a degree that it couldn't politically and militarily resist. When you think about the Trump plan of expelling everybody, the number of people who are being killed, this is where Israel is moving if it has impunity. That's why the impunity has to stop. Only once the impunity stops will you start to have a discussion in Israel in which people think about genuine other alternatives. People who become accustomed to legal supremacy, whether it's white South Africans or white Southerners in the U.S. or Protestants in Northern Ireland, never think about a plan B unless there is domestic and international resistance that forces them to think in a different way.
Peter, do you think anyone in America should be deported for having either toxic or bigoted or violent views, just views, and if so, on which terms?
No, I don't believe that people should be deported for their political views. I mean, the U.S. did this during the Red Scare, right? And some people did have vile political views if they were apologists for, Stalin, Soviet Union or something. But no, I mean, I think we should have an immigration policy that is based on, what we think you can contribute to the country, various different factors. And I would say that even people whose views were odious to me, I don't think should have their green cards or their student visas revoked because their political views. If someone supports Donald Trump, I think that's an odious position, but I wouldn't deport them for that reason. And in fact, many of the people that have been put in detention, I actually think have views that are really not very odious at all, right? But they're just being attacked as part of Donald Trump's effort to basically silence dissent against his regime.
Peter Beinart, thank you for joining us. Enjoy your time in Australia.
Thank you.
And that is all for Planet America's Weekend Edition. We'll see you again in the Situation Room on ABC TV Wednesday night at 9 p.m.
And join us here at the same time next week on ABC News, iView and online. See you then.
Bye-bye.